This is an attempt to explain how a quilt is made, beginning at buying the material, through laying it out, through sewing it together, quilting it, and sewing on the binding. The first picture we see here is where we bought some of the fabric for the quilt. It's hayloft fabric down in Lancaster County. Inside the shop, there are thousands of bolts of material, and Chris is seen here looking at different materials, trying to pick out the right material for what she has in mind for the quilt. This is an example of a few bolts of material that she has to pick from. This is just one side of the store. The other side of the store has less than this, but still quite a number of bolts of material. This is one of the materials that she was considering. I don't recall if this was chosen or not, but this is the way it's done. She pulls out the material, lays it out there, and looks at it and tries to compare it with other materials that they have. This is another one of the materials that she is looking at and comparing with what she wants to do with the quilt. On the wall you see all these pink and white colors. Those are all stencils, and these are stencils that she has to pick from to incorporate into the quilt. These are more of the stencils on that same wall. There must be thousands of stencils that she can look through and pick from. Fortunately, they are organized so you don't have to look through all of them. Shopping is done for today. Putting the what she has bought in the trunk of the car and getting ready to proceed on, probably to another fabric store. This is an Amish horse in the front of the carriage. There were people in the carriage and they don't want their picture taken. Therefore, I couldn't take a picture of the carriage, but I thought the horse was beautiful and decided to take a picture. This was outside one of the stores where she goes to. Here, Chris is doing research, looking up Bible verses, trying to decide what she's going to include on the quilt. And as you have seen by now, she's chosen a number of different Bible verses from both the Old and New Testaments. Here she's writing the scriptures that she's found on the quilt squares, and then she will either quilt around them or quilt them into the material. This is a square which we both particularly like. We like the color and the flower and all that's there. And then in the circle, as you have already seen, is the scripture from Luke 12:27. We hope that you like it as much as we do. This quilt square, she typed the song Little David onto the computer, and I then transferred it onto transfer paper, which she ironed onto the material. This is just one way of including different things, verses, pictures, whatever, into a quilt. This is another one of our favorite squares in the quilt with the verses from Matthew chapter 18, verses 19 and 20. In this particular square, you can see where we've used the process that I described previously, in that we ironed, or we transferred those pictures onto transfer paper, and then she ironed them onto the quilt square, and the Bible verse was typed into the computer, and we transferred that onto the quilt square also. This is a square with Psalm 23 on it. As I described previously, this was actually copied from one of the Bible places on the internet, and placed into the computer, and then copied onto transfer paper and transferred onto the material. This is the beginning of a square with a dove on it, and in it you can see a reference to a scripture, and later on we'll see the completed square. That this is, as I say, this is just the beginning of the square. This is a square with a butterfly drawn on it, and with reference to scripture from Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9. This is a personal square which I presume you have seen by now, where it says about your names and our names in the presentation of the quilt to you. Here we have a square drawn by Chris, where she references Psalms 145 verse 136. She drew the picture onto the square, and then quilted around it, and as you'll see later in the presentation. This is a square, another square, where Chris drew a scene on the material, and a verse from the scriptures, and it says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. She does very well in doing all of this. This is a square, again drawn by Chris, of David playing the harp surrounded by sheep. This is another square that Chris drew, and is entitled He is Risen, and it shows two men looking at the empty tomb. This is a praying square, and it refers to James 5:136, and again Chris has drawn this one onto the material. This square represents the parable of the Good Shepherd from John chapter 10 verse 11, and again it shows John leading the sheep. This depicts David facing the giant. David, of course, being the little guy there, and the big guy is the giant, which he eventually slew with a sling and a rock.
The battle's not mine, said little David. Lord is thine, I'm in your favor. He said, the battle's not mine, I give it to you. Lord, it's